Welcome, everyone. This is your friend Joseph Craven here for ROTC Sports, the sports talk equivalent of taking a knee, running out the clock. I'm joined by my good friend for over a decade now. Can you believe that?
Wow.
My good friend, for over a decade, Jim Stickland, a.k.a. Jim and M. Don't confuse it with Eminem. He is Auburn superfan, friend of the program, and Twitch streamer extraordinaire, joining me on this Auburn football podcast episode of ROTC. Jim, what is up?
What is up? Thanks for having me on, my man, Joseph Craven.
War Eagle. Happy to have you. I'm looking forward to hearing your opinions. You're never one to shy away from a strong opinion when it comes to your Auburn Tigers. One of the main reasons I wanted to chat with you about them today. This is awesome. Before we get going, though, we're actually live streaming on your Twitch channel right now. So shout out to everyone who's tuning into the Twitch stream, getting to hear this content before it even gets released on the podcast. Jim, how often do you actually stream on Twitch?
My typical regular schedule when I am in the flow is 4 nights a week: Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday on Fortnite. Typically 8 p.m. Central to about midnight or longer if we're having a really great time, which we usually are.
And if I'm not mistaken, Saturdays are for the subs. Is that right?
Saturdays are for the subs.
We have a. This is kind of off the subject a bit, but one of the things I think is funny is this time last year, I was recording an Auburn preview with a man by the name of Chad Gibbs, who's a close friend of mine.
Oh, one of my idols.
Which is funny because I'm most familiar with Chad because years ago, he wrote a book called God and Football, exploring the two major loves of like the Southeast, college football and like church. And you told me to check the book out, and I bought it. And being a Mississippi State guy myself, I bought it. And then the Cam Newton year happened, and I decided I don't want to read this book because it was written by an Auburn fan. And so I didn't read it. And so I bought this book blindly off of your recommendation, didn't read it. Years later, actually met Chad, told him that story, and he said, I don't care. I still got your money anyway. So, and then we became good friends.
And now that's the thing. I got to explain it on my side. Like I was so obsessed with this book, but this guy was so funny. It's a
great book.
He reminded me of your humor. And so I knew that you would love it, even though it's an Auburn fan written by an Auburn book and almost solely about Auburn. And this guy, I was upset. I'm obsessed with Chad. Chad, if you happen to listen to this, you're awesome. War Eagle, love you. And I told him to read it. He wouldn't read it like he said. And now he's best friends with the guy.
Right. I was chatting with him just the other day. Chad actually has a novel out right now called Two Like Me and You, which if any of you are Kindle readers is on sale. Actually, by the time the podcast comes out, it will no longer be on sale. So,
sorry. The best I got, you talk to him like every day. He did like one of my tweets one time, so I have that.
Nice. I love it. All right, let's talk Auburn. Let's get into this a little bit here. The Auburn Tigers last season, I'm terrible at predicting, by the way. I'm terrible at predicting things. I never get anything right, so I try not to really say much of anything. But when I was doing research on Auburn for last year's season preview episode, I discovered a strange trend that every time under Malzahn, either as head coach, and you and I were talking about this before we actually went on the air, either as head coach or when he was the offensive coordinator, anytime that Auburn has had a very good double-digit win season and Malzahn has been there, the next season it is followed up by an 8-5 year. It happened between 2010 and 11 when he was coordinator. It happened between
national championships 2010,
right?
Then 8-5.
Then 8-5. It happened in 2013 and 14. His first season as head coach. Went to the championship game, 12-2, and then 8-5 in 2014. And then, so 2 years ago, 2017, having a 10-win season, I just said, you know what? I think they're going to go 8-5 because of the trend it has, and it happened. It's like the only thing I've ever gotten right.
They did.
So bounce. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I got to say about that, from my memory, now I'm just spitting from the hip right now. From what I remember, each of those 8-5 seasons that came right after a really awesome season, which is funny that you noticed this. I believe that we had. I mean, it makes sense because we just came off a great season. But each of those 8-5 seasons, we came in with really high expectations.
Yes.
And so
huge expectations, and also I think in a couple of them there might have been changes at quarterback. In at least like the two that happened before 2017 to 18.
Sure. After 2010, obviously Cam Newton went to the NFL. After the national championship season, though, we did have the same quarterback the next year. Actually, Nick Marshall came back.
So you didn't really have a quarterback,
right? He wasn't even a quarterback, but he was pretty dang good. He was
heck of an athlete, heck of a football player.
Not playing quarterback his whole life.
You gotta have respect for the guys that are just so good at like the sport in general that they can play the most important, position, quarterback, when it's not even really their position. So
yeah, it's wild. He played for the Jaguars. I don't think he's in the league anymore. He's playing in Canada, I believe.
Okay. Might have to get someone to fact check that for us later on. But so you're coming off of an 8-5 year. You're heading into a season where you always have, like, I guess, the fringe fans that call for Malzahn's head when things start to go poorly, because that's how college football works. And like the moment something goes wrong, it's this coach needs to be canned. Like, get him out of here now. What have you done for me lately? Mindset is always there. Coming into the next season. What do you think is kind of the mindset of, I guess, the fan base when they look at what happened last year and this whole what have you done for me lately?
So not me, but the fan base in general. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, in general. Like, what are you picking up when you see?
In general, there's a lot of, there's a ton of nervousness. We're coming off where a lot of people want Gus out. I don't think the majority do, but there's a large contingency that wants Gus out. Yeah. We came off a below average season we were supposed to do very well. We were highly ranked going into the season. We're coming into a new season. A lot of nervousness comes from we don't even know who our quarterback is yet, and it's July. We lost all three linebackers. There's a lot of nervousness, but there's also a lot of reasons to be positive that we can talk about, and we're going to talk about in a minute. But I would say, in general, the Auburn crowd is very nervous going into the season. There's not a lot of high expectations. And I know a lot of people say this. Everybody says this, that, teams perform better when the pressure's not so high, right? But Auburn especially does not perform well when they come with high expectations.
So do you think it's a benefit then that maybe the pressure's off? Is it? Yeah. Okay.
The pressure is off right now. Yeah. Except for one guy.
Right, except for the guy who might be unemployed.
The main guy, the head coach. So not that matters.
No, of course not. Of course not. Well, let me ask you this then. There's two things that when I kind of look at, or in particular when I try to talk with someone who follows the team closely, and actually is not just because a lot of these times ROTC we try to cover the whole SEC. And every now and then that means, trying to record a preview for Vanderbilt. And it's like, I don't follow Vanderbilt and no one else in the cast of ROTC. We've got about 4 or 5 guys that rotate in and out. None of them follow Vanderbilt. So you have to do more research and all that. When you have someone on here who actually follows the team closely, it's kind of fair to ask them these two questions, I feel like. Okay. What's something you're maybe worried about going into this next season? What's something you're not worried about going into this next season? So those are, and the reason I mentioned that, I'll give you a moment, maybe collect your thoughts, but is because you already mentioned it. A lot of questions about who's going to take over for Jarrett Stidham at quarterback. Because I believe they're even, correct me if I'm wrong, where there's someone who transferred out, who was a quarterback as well.
The guy who's been the backup the past 2 years, Malik Willis, has transferred out.
Thank you. So, he hopped out, so question marks there. As you mentioned, all 3 linebackers gone as well, starting linebackers gone. So, when you look at that, what's something that you look at the team and maybe you're worried about coming into this season?
I look at the team and I am worried I'm worried about something I mentioned before, and that is the pressure on Gus.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's been without putting it clear in ink, it's abundantly clear that if he doesn't do very well this season, that he's out.
Yeah.
I don't think if he goes 9-4, he's out necessarily. There's kind of a gray area, but I'm mostly worried about the pressure that's put on Gus right now. I'm not as worried about the missing linebackers, starting, and quarterbacks as most people are, and we can get to that in a minute. But I am mostly worried about the pressure under Gus Malzahn and a lot of people calling for him publicly to fire him. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm most worried about.
I mean, that sort of thing just adds so many distractions
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
the team, to the season, when you're having to deal with. I mean, like you said, maybe there's not as much pressure on the team itself, but all the pressure is on Gus now, and it could be a massive distraction to the team's performance.
Yeah, and players are on social media more than they ever have. I mean,
Yeah.
it's they see the fans talking negatively about their coaching staff, and so no matter how positive the coaches can be in the locker room, when they go home and they're sitting there for hours just scrolling through social media and seeing fans talk so negatively about our coaching staff, that's going to affect the psyche.
It really is. Really is. So, on the flip side of that, is there something that you look at and you're not necessarily feeling? I know you kind of said the QB linebacker situation didn't worry you as much as maybe other people, but is there something where you look at it and you feel like you're not all that worried about, Auburn going into this year?
I am not worried about Gus taking back the play calling duties at all.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, it is one thing. It's. I wish that he was our offensive coordinator and that's it, because being a head coach and play calling are two separate, complete jobs that you need
Yeah.
two different people to have. Um, Being a head coach, you have to manage the psyche that I mentioned of the players and the morale and the discipline and the overseeing and managing the other coaching staff and the relationships that you're building. And play calling is is literally a job in itself, and studying the defenses week by week by week and studying the calls and implementing the calls and practicing the calls. However, Gus in the past few years, Gus has tried to relinquish that, which is smart for a head coach. At first, it sounds smart because of all the other responsibilities that he has. The problem was there was he had his foot still halfway in the door of the play calling, and so there was just tension on who was really the main play caller. I don't think any of our offensive coordinators in the past few years have really felt like it was truly theirs. And so I think that they looked poor, even though they might not have been that bad at play callers. They just never really were given the full job. I'm not trying to just take one game and run with it, but the Purdue Gus Malzahn took back
Mhm.
over for offensive coordinator, and we put up 63 points on Purdue, who wasn't a fantastic team, but they did beat Ohio State this last season. I see people in chat saying OH.
There's a
So
lot of Ohio State fans popping up in the chat, which is
yeah.
yeah, pretty interesting to see.
So I'm not worried about him play calling. I really am. I think that's where he thrives. I'm not worried about wide receivers.
Oh
Auburn,
no, goodness no.
even though Auburn lost the all-time leading receiver Ryan Davis, as well as an exceptional deep threat in Darius Slayton, even though they're losing those two studs, we are. We have some serious talent coming back, and Seth Williams, which is one of my dark horses to be the best receiver in the SEC, at least in the next couple of years. Schwartz, Matthew Hill, ton of huge, talented receivers coming in, as well as a lot of people are forgetting the veterans who were hurt last year, Eli Stove
Yeah.
and
Will Hastings.
Will Hastings. Yes, Will Hastings, some studs.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of Anthony Schwartz. I'm a big fan of Anthony Schwartz. I like what he brings because he's young. He's a young dude still. And to bring that, I'm a big fan of anytime you have a track star who then goes and becomes a wide receiver. I don't know why I'm fascinated by that, but there's been a handful of those guys throughout the years that on different teams I've seen come in and play. And I just really like what they bring, because a lot of times I feel like they can bring in, I don't know, it's more fluid running. They bring in a more disciplined running than you get with a lot of wide receivers who try to do a lot of, jab step juke moves, make,
Absolutely.
maybe more yardage after the catch. They try to make people miss, all that sort of. Maybe the guys that fit the slot receiver mold that's, very popular in most teams these days, which, are great and all. But I love when you get a track guy to come in and play wide receiver because they're good disciplined runners and they just can create good separation better than I think a lot of guys who don't have any track experience can do.
Yeah, speed is more important than ever. I mean, it's not as much smash mouth football anymore, and especially with Gus's play calling system, opening the field up, lots of screens, getting the guys the ball with speed is huge. And we just happen to have two of the top 10 fastest players in the country, let alone the number one fastest player in the country, as well, one of the best fastest player in the world.
Yeah, exactly. So that's going to be very fascinating. I mean, the big question mark there is, are they going to have someone that can throw the ball to them, who is going to take over? So who do you think in that quarterback battle there, who do you think has the upper hand right now? I mean, do you think they go ahead and try to hand it over to like Bo Nix?
Man, this is the most fun part right here, the quarterback race. Like everybody wants to know who the quarterback's going to be. I mean, it is like arguably the most important position.
Sure.
Man, I think anybody's lying if they say that they know who's going to be the starter because Joey Gatewood, okay? The closest thing to Cam Newton right now that we have in college football, I believe, 6'4", 240. Someone might need a fact check on me. Big guy, fat, got some speed, strong arm, been under the system for a year under Gus, studying the system. But then we have Bo Nix, a legacy. His father was a quarterback at Auburn. His father is a coach, an exceptional coach, and has been raising Bo Nix to be a quarterback his entire life. This guy is Auburn through and through. He's a 5-star prospect, for goodness sake.
Yeah, exactly.
Got a lot of talent coming in. They're both super, super talented, but they're lacking experience. And the SEC experience goes a long way in the SEC. So I'm nervous, although I'm excited because there's so much talent. And I've seen Gus take lesser talented players and make them thrive in the quarterback position in the SEC with the players that have speed. The players that didn't have speed, it was kind of tough. So Joey is going to be a little bit more of your runner, be able to run over guys, a little bit of Cam Newton style. Bo is a little bit Bo's going to be a little bit more accurate. He's going to be a little bit more shifty in the pocket. But Joey Gatewood's going to be able to better running down the field and a little bit better, little stronger arm. What I'm worried about is this day in football, in college football, which I don't know if I really like, is I want them to be able to go play where they want to play and not waste their college years. But it just seems so easy. It seems like they can sneeze and they can just go to whatever team they want. So I'm worried that because of how so talented they are, if one quarterback loses the job, I mean, both these guys, for all we know, could be in the NFL one day. They know that, and they try to leave. And right now we don't really have the depth because our third string guy has gone.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
It's young quarterbacking options, like you were just saying. You got a true freshman who early enrollee, but has this whole he accounted for more than 12,000 career offensive yards in high school and 161 career touchdowns, which I believe are both Alabama state records.
Yeah, an animal.
Which I can only assume would have been your records if you had, stayed in Alabama for all of your high school career.
Of course.
Of course. So he's got that going for him. But then there's a lot to be said. But he's drastically different from a physical standpoint than Gatewood. Nix is listed here as about 6'2", 207, right? Whereas Gatewood is listed at 6'5", 230. So you got the different, physical attributes there. Along with that, I mean, Gatewood's had a full year in the system and practicing. He's had a redshirt season. He's been able to have that experience. Not only that, but of course, they had the redshirt rules where you could actually play in a few games and then be redshirted and keep your redshirt status. So he actually had a minor amount of playing time. That, as far as I can tell, wasn't really anything. It just was 28 rushing yards in the Music City Bowl.
Sure.
And, that's about it. So, I mean, it's questions like that of like, okay, I mean, You don't know much about either of them right now. You other than reputation, other than comparisons,
Correct.
Gatewood is the closest thing that Gus has had to Cam Newton since Cam Newton. Okay,
And look how that went.
right, exactly. So, but is he Cam Newton? Right,
I mean, who
and
is?
is anyone going to compare to that? So it's tricky. It's tricky for sure. A lot of times when you got those young quarterbacks, you have to default to giving them time to grow, giving them time to develop, and as a byproduct of that, you really want to be able to really focus on the running game for them. The
Yes.
last year was the first time in how many years?
Over a decade,
Over a
or it might have
decade.
been a decade exactly.
I think it was a decade exactly that Auburn did not have a 1,000-yard rusher. A lot of that, came down to maybe bouncing around too much between different running backs. A lot of it came down to some offensive
Yeah.
line issues. When you look at the Auburn running game coming into this season, you've got what should be a much stronger offensive line, and you've got two guys in particular who should get the bulk of the carries here. How are you feeling about the running game for Auburn this year?
Yeah, last year the running game, it was sad to watch. For as long as I remember, I know what they said over a decade we haven't had a 1,000-yard rusher, but I can't actually remember in my mind a season my whole life that we didn't. So I think it was because of what you said. We had a little bit running back by committee. We spread the load. As well as like the majority of the first half of the season, our offensive line struggled. They did show some improvement towards the end of the season, which is awesome because they're all returning this year, and that's going to be a huge strength, I believe. I think the offensive line got downplayed a little bit this year coming into this year because of their lack of performance last year. We didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher. Stidham got sacked a lot. But I think what they're missing is the improvement they showed, number one, and all 5 returners. And so I saw mixed reviews on magazines. Some were saying that offensive line is going to be a strength for Auburn because they're returning, and some were saying it's going to be poor. But I do think it's going to be a huge strength, as well as running. Even though they were running back by committee, we didn't have the uber talented running back. I don't think Booby or Cam Martin, Booby's a funny name, by the way. I don't think Booby or Cam Martin are near as talented as the running backs we've had over the past decade. However, they're coming back for another season. Players at this age come back with more experience, come back with more strength, more speed under this collegiate sports strength and conditioning, as well as we got some exciting freshmen coming in. DJ Williams, really excited about him. We have some pretty high talented guys coming in.
Yeah, you say, I assume you're talking about San Francisco 49ers and Buffalo Bills legend Booby Dixon when you say Booby. That's the only Booby that comes to mind. Yeah.
Excuse me. Booby Whitlow. Jonathan Booby Whitlow.
So Whitlow and Martin. I guess Martin's a rising senior right now, but Whitlow's only, I think, a sophomore. Is that right?
I'll have to check that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up right here, and I think that's what I found here. It could be wrong. I'm on my personal favorite sports website, sportsreference.com. Nice. It's just numbers, man. It's just numbers and stats. It's beautiful. But so you got Martin and Whitlow returning, both of those guys having the bulk of the carries last year. Whitlow actually with 150 attempts for 787 yards and 6 touchdowns, and averaging 5 yards a carry. So when you hear the stats of, well, Auburn didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher last year, then it makes it sound like Auburn had the world's worst rushing game, or for some reason, and maybe there were moments in which it struggled and it appeared that way. And there were a few games, I believe, where neither of them broke 100 yards in particular. But most of that's going to come from, most of the negativity surrounding that's going to come from the comparison to the historical background of Auburn being able to produce a good rushing attack.
Yeah, we've been spoiled. But Booby is not a below average rusher. I would consider him an above average rusher for sure. I don't think he's got the elite talent that we had previously. Kerryon Johnson,
right,
and so on.
Yeah, and I think it makes it makes it very obvious that he's the guy to look to here. I remember there being more Cam Martin hype coming into last season. I
Yes,
think mostly because people are just more familiar with him. I mean, Whitlow
right.
was still fairly new to the program. But then
Cam was, Cam was a little bit
Whitlow was able to produce. Yeah.
right. Cam was a little bit higher of a prospect
Mhm.
coming in when he was recruited. He also was a starter coming into last season. He even performed well game 1 against Washington. And then the performance kind of dropped off, but it was odd because the carries really dropped off. So I wasn't really sure about that decision. But yeah, they're both returning, both experienced, both are said to be stronger and faster. And so I'm excited. I'm excited coming into with the rushing game.
With the added experience on the offensive line and in
Mhm.
the running backs, do you think that's going to be enough to help out whatever young quarterback ends up taking the reins for a successful offense this
Oh,
season?
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's absolute key to helping them. I'm concerned that we're going to
Yeah,
run a
it's going to be
quarterback
key,
system.
but are they going to be able to do it? That's the question. Do you think they're going to be able to do it?
This is why I think they do. I'm sorry. I think they will. The only reason they won't is Gus running a 2 quarterback system, and that makes me nervous. Um, I think that they both can apply different strengths. Like you said, they're like almost 2 different uh, athletic statures, different style quarterbacks, and you can confuse defenses. In theory, it sounds great, but there is a lot to be said about making a guy the leader and giving him a rhythm and developing chemistry with the entire team, as well as momentum, and as well as not letting the kid think having so much pressure that he thinks he's going to be losing his job at any given play. So I don't love the 2 quarterback system, and I'm nervous that we're going to do that. Also, just to make sure that we can keep both of them.
Mhm.
Gus has done that in the past, probably with lesser talented guys, but it didn't work out at all.
So while there have been a lot of the question marks on offense, and while offense in particular, I think took a lot of the headlines from last season, it because of the offensive struggles and probably what you were saying earlier, because of the amount of hype and expectation going into the year, I think it overshadowed, therefore, what was a good defensive season for the Auburn Tigers,
Yeah,
and then and I think probably that ends up being kind of a blessing in disguise because I think them being overshadowed is what convinced all of the defensive linemen to stay in school instead of because I know in particular Derek Brown. I think a lot of people were thinking was a
yeah,
surefire go off to the NFL, make your and he decided to stick
easily
around.
drafted.
Yeah, um, so you Auburn defense returns um, that stacked defensive. Man, there were some good defensive lines in the SEC last year. I mean, my goodness, there were some. I'm just thinking about, but you got Auburn's incredible defensive line. You had the great line at Mississippi State. You had guys like Jabari Zuniga at Florida, who was an incredible pass rusher. Like, man, there were some good defensive lines last year. So good.
Man, it just means more.
um, so you've got them returning. You have maybe the questions at linebacker, but you also have a lot returning, I believe, in the secondary. That was a serviceable. Maybe didn't get the headlines, but it seemed like a pretty decent secondary there. Auburn defense, when you look at it, I mean, what do you see there as being what should be the more solid returning piece for the Tigers this year?
Sure, the solid returning piece. Are you talking about defense in general?
Defense in general. I mean, when you compare especially compared to offense, especially compared to an offense that kind of struggled and then lost a lot in, Stidham and the top wide receivers and all of that. So
Yes.
comparatively speaking, you look at the
Comparatively
defense. You can see.
speaking, absolutely. I'm much more excited about the defense. Extremely high. I mean, a lot of magazines ranking Auburn #1, not just in the SEC, but the country in
Yeah.
defensive line. Friend of the Twitch stream, Derek Brown, by the way. That'd be pretty cool to have him a first round pick and friend and playing Fortnite with me on the stream. You guys have met him, who've watched as well. I mean, there's not much to be said about him. He could potentially be the #1 overall pick. I mean, he's
Yeah.
that talented
Exactly.
coming to the season. I could list all the names. We all kind of know that Auburn's defensive line is going to be strong. The secondary, I think you hit it on the head. very strong. I think a little bit overlooked. A lot of returners. Daniel Brown, another friend of the Twitch stream. Probably the biggest Auburn player that I played with all the time, and he was ranked on the top 25 on some list as top 25 defensive players. Strong safety. We got Smoke Monday, my favorite name in college football.
Such a good name.
Not biased, War Eagle. I think that the secondary will be great. Definitely above average. The defensive line will be absolutely exceptional, and the linebacking crew, the linebackers are going to be a surprise. I really do. Would you like to go ahead and transition to the linebacking core?
Absolutely, man. Why not? You're setting it up so perfectly. Just keep going. Don't let me get in your way.
Let's do it. Okay, so hear me out. Linebackers ranked towards the bottom, NCC, different magazines, some Phil Steele, Athlon, they're saying, and I honestly think this is a little bit lazy just reporting. I think, Auburn's not returning. They lost all 3 starters. That is a big blow. That really is.
Yeah.
But just automatically putting Auburn towards the bottom of the list is a little bit lazy, in my opinion, because 5-star Papo's coming in. Other guys have experience. They have played. They haven't started, but they've been playing. They have experience behind the line. Ton of huge talent coming in. And our coach, T. Will, as we affectionately call him on Twitter, as well as he's a rapper. Our linebacking coach has a ton of success in the past. So I think that Auburn linebacking core, without, even though they don't have the experience, even though they're losing not only 3 starters, but they're like the quarterback on defense, and Deshaun Davis, from his leadership, his heart, his soul. I mean, that's a big blow. But I think the Auburn linebackers are going to be a surprise success this coming season.
I mean, if we go back to the kind of the reoccurring theme of how
lost your volume just a tad bit.
What's that?
I lost your volume just a tad bit.
Oh, weird.
There we go.
If we go back to the reoccurring theme of the expectations, then obviously, yes, you have the two sides of, we don't know anything about the Auburn linebacking core, so we can't rank them anywhere but last because we don't know anything yet, But on the flip side of that, there's no expectations for them, which gives them the freedom to get out there and play their style, play their game, play the way that they need to do, that they need to play in order to be successful. And the pressure's not on them, The pressure is on the defensive line to keep up their productivity. The pressure is on the secondary to take advantage. Because, from being playing quarterback in high school and stuff like that, that in the defense, if you've got a strong defensive line, it makes your secondary look a whole lot better. You put pressure on a quarterback, the secondary doesn't have to cover as long. They capitalize on mistakes, so on and so forth. The pressure should not be on the young linebackers for Auburn. The pressure is on the more established groups to play off of each other and to give the linebackers freedom to grow. So, I think even if we look back at the end of the season, the linebackers for Auburn were not that great.
Yeah, they weren't even that talented. Those 3 starters that we lost weren't uber talented guys. They were just they were heart and soul guys, hard workers.
Yeah, exactly. I think if we look, even if the new linebackers this season aren't great by the end of the year, we look at the end of the year and they didn't have an amazing season, I think even then it's not going to matter that much. I think we're going to look at it and say, okay, yeah, it was we didn't expect them to do a huge amount other than get in there, get playing time, and grow as players. That's what they accomplished. That's the goal for the linebackers this year. You mentioned already, what's his name? Papo.
So we got Papo was our big 5-star guy. We've got KJ Britt, Wooten, McLean, all more talented guys according to scouts and in practice than the 3 starters that we lost. They just don't have the experience, of course.
Right. But you mentioned guys like Papo. There's another freshman, Derek Hall.
Yes.
That there's some high expectations for as far as what he can do in coming in as a freshman. I think as long as those guys, if they're called upon to play, as long as they get out there, get experience, that's really what would be a victory for the linebacking core this year.
You couldn't have said it better. Combining the non-pressure with the fact that all they got to do is have an average season, and Auburn's defense is going to be great.
Yeah, I think that I think people are just they're blowing it out of proportion. I think you're right. When people make a big fuss about the linebacking core and maybe some publications, I do think it is. Yeah, it's lazy. It's mostly because they look at it. They're like, well, we don't know anything, so like we
Sure.
don't know anything about it. So yeah, they must not. Man, who cares? This would be a story if the defensive line had all left, right? You know?
Yes.
If the defensive line had left and you had all these new linebackers coming in, yeah, that would be a bigger story. It's just not that huge of a story, I feel like.
Right.
It's
Right.
really not.
I do got to say, a lot of the guys that were turning a defensive line, I blew them out with my high expectations at the beginning. But being ranked number 1 in the country,
Yeah.
I know why they did it. We have a lot of talent on the defensive line, but these same guys, which I expect them to be better this year, but these same guys last year also still had high expectations, and we honestly didn't pressure the quarterback that much last year. So I am hoping to see a lot of improvements on that side.
Yeah, I mean, what was Auburn as a whole last season was top 15 in scoring defense. And where do they rank as far as rushing? I changed the category I was looking at, and it completely rearranged everything. Well, they were a great defense, the top 15 defense in general.
Sure, yeah.
But then also had a great defensive line that returns. There they are. 136 yards on the ground. On average, it looks worse than it really is. That still was such a good defensive line. They held opponents to so little in general.
No, don't get me wrong. They're incredible. They're incredible.
Yeah.
I think if I was to say that they had one weakness, these same guys, which I expect improvement, but they didn't get a ton of pressure on quarterbacks.
Right. Exactly. Still, a top 40 defense in the country last year, a top 15 scoring defense. If the defense does what it needs to do and the offense is halfway productive, that's still, we're still looking at a decent season for Auburn in general. I feel like here, let's go ahead and look at the schedule then. Let's kind of wrap things up by looking at the schedule and kind of breaking that down a little bit, because we can talk about the players, we can talk about who returns and who's being replaced. We can talk about all of that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean much if the schedule is not kind.
You asked me at the beginning what I was most worried about. Yeah. And I think I'm so worried about it that I'm so scared that I didn't even want to mention it. But that has to be, if I'm really honest with myself, that has to be what I'm most worried about going into the season, is our schedule. Arguably the number 1 hardest. I might say South Carolina has a little bit harder. But regardless, they're both insane. Did you have a question?
Who's got a brutal schedule, actually, is Vanderbilt. The preview we put out last week with Vanderbilt, Ro Hunter and I were going through that episode, and we got to the end and looked at the schedule and both went, oh gosh.
Who do they play in the West?
Vanderbilt always plays Ole Miss in the West.
Right.
But they I'll pull it up real quick, just because we're on it.
While you're talking about it, I'll go ahead and, just for those that don't know, each team in the West, they draw 2 teams from the East each season. Each team in the East draws 2 teams from the West each season. Is that still correct?
Yeah. Normally, there's always one set, right, like a interdivisional rival. Yeah.
Kind of a rivalry. Like Auburn always plays Georgia.
Yeah.
Very. How lucky are we?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And then the other draw that we got this season is Florida, who's supposed to be really good. Like, why couldn't we have drawn Florida? It's like sometime in the past 8 years.
Know. Exactly. At any other point in time. Yeah, that's how it always happens, though. Yeah, so Vanderbilt has to open up against Georgia, by the way. Vanderbilt opens up their entire season against Georgia.
Okay.
And then they also have LSU from the West, Ole Miss from the West. They have to go to South Carolina, to Florida. Vanderbilt has a terrible schedule. Anyway.
Sure.
Back to the team at hand. Let's run through Auburn's schedule real quick. For those of you listening, they open up the season in a neutral site game against Oregon. How do you feel about neutral site games to start the season, by the way?
I don't really love it for college football, to be honest. I think that college football is awesome because of its pageantry, its tradition.
Yep.
I mean, the wild student section.
Yep.
There's nothing like a student section at a college, especially an SEC football game. I mean, I don't know. The fans are. I don't know. I don't love it, but I don't mind it. I mean, it's kind of exciting to have a kind of a fair, neutral, quote unquote field.
Yeah,
What
they
about?
say that. They say
Yeah,
that,
it's
and
not
then like Auburn opens up the year like in Atlanta
right, 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 right.
against like Syracuse, and you're like, how is that neutral at all? That sort of nonsense. I'm not a huge fan of them, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't really have as a fan, like as a super fan of Auburn, like I don't really have that big of a desire. I'd rather save my money and time and go to an actual home Auburn game
Yeah,
where I can experience all the traditions and
right,
the rolling tumors corners when we win, because of course we're going to win,
right.
and the eagle fly and all that stuff. So
That's one of the coolest things I've ever seen in person is the eagle flying to begin an Auburn game. Like
okay,
it gave
go
me
ahead.
chills. It gave me actual chills, and I wasn't even there, for Auburn or anything. I'm just sitting there going, "This is really cool."
Man, so I know you're a big Mississippi State fan, so this is appropriate time to bring this up. So I had I'm my wife's first time at an Auburn game ever
Mhm.
was an Auburn Mississippi State game. It was in Auburn, and we had been dating for a long time, and I had talked about Auburn so much to the point where like she's a huge Auburn fan now. But I had talked this Eagle up, man. I had talked it up like it is one of the coolest things that she's ever going to witness in person ever, and I still to this day believe it is one of the coolest things you can see.
Yeah.
But the one game that she came to, I mean, we were watching the Eagle fly, and so those that don't know, the stadium fits over 90,000 people. And if you watch Lord of the Rings Two Towers, the orcs, there was a lot of orcs that stormed, and those are only 10,000. So imagine 9 times that. And so they release an eagle, a golden eagle sometimes the ball, they rotate it, but they release an eagle from the upper deck, and it's trained and it circles the stadium. I don't know if we have time to go into why we say War Eagle, but that could be maybe for another time. But it
Another
circles the
time,
stadium,
another time.
and the whole crowd is chanting "Whoa!" as it circles. They're screaming "War!" And as it lands right in the middle, they say "Eagle, hey!" And it's 90,000 people just screaming, and it just chills. Oh, it's so cool. So my wife's there. The eagle's flying. It catches its reflection in the press box and flies right into the press box. Drops. It looks like it passed out. Drops, almost hits a fan, but somehow, like, I guess wakes up right before it hits a hand in the head and just starts flying again. And everybody's like, whoa, oh. And my wife is laughing, and I'm like, I'm so disappointed. But anyway,
The one time you really needed that eagle to be on his game.
the one time. All that to be said, I don't really care for neutral game sites.
Yeah, it's dumb. You lose a lot of exactly what you're saying. You lose a lot of the pageantry.
Yeah.
So anyway, neutral site against Oregon to open things up. Then two home non-conference opponents, Tulane and Kent State, going up against the MAC, man. Little Maction in the SEC on September 14th. After that, open up conference play at Texas A&M. Bring the Mississippi State Bulldogs to the Plains the next week. Then go on a nasty road trip at Florida. Go about as far away from there as you can and go to Arkansas. And then have to go down to the boot itself, Baton Rouge and LSU, before winding up with 4 straight home games: Ole Miss, Georgia, Samford as the warm-up game for the Iron Bowl to end the season. First and foremost, I mean, only 4 like designated away games, because the neutral site game doesn't necessarily count. Only 4 like away games, and you see in particular it's A&M, Florida, Arkansas, LSU, so not kind away games there. Tough schedule. What's your thought looking at the schedule about what Auburn's going to be able to do with all this?
Man, I mentioned Florida, and like, oh, great, we drew Florida when they finally are good again.
Yep.
The same thing goes for Oregon. Oregon was
Yeah.
really good for a long time, and then they had some down years, and they're supposed to be good again.
Yep.
What do you know? And we schedule these years and years out, so it's like it's kind of just luck of the draw, I guess. But Oregon's going to be tough. I think we should be able to manhandle our line, our offensive line, and defensive line should be enough to manhandle those Pac-12 boys. I mean, our schedule is absolutely brutal for playing a top 10 team. Wait, what's Oregon ranked?
I don't know if they have any official preseason rankings out right now.
Well, a lot of people are,
Yeah.
at least what I'm reading, are ranking them preseason top 10, top
Yeah.
15. So that's our out of conference, and let alone, okay, we play in the SEC. Oh no, we also play in the SEC West. So we're going to play Alabama. We're going to play Mississippi State.
Yeah.
We're going to play LSU. We're playing at LSU. We have not won in Baton Rouge since 1999. That's 20 years.
20 years.
And I have been to 3 of those, and they were awful games to go to.
Yeah. Not to mention, this is an LSU team that is really finding its footing under the Raging Cajun himself, Ed Orgeron. You know, so
who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Oh man, it's rough. So you look at this schedule as a whole. How do you think Auburn actually does?
If you couldn't sense from what I was saying earlier, I do have some excitement for the level of talent that we have coming into the season. Even with the unknowns, even with the lack of pressure, I think Auburn does really well with that. But the biggest obstacle that we have is our schedule. Playing Alabama, playing Georgia, playing LSU, Florida. I mean, all those teams I just listed, Oregon. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams that I just said are potential top 10 teams.
Yeah.
5. Oh, wait, Texas A&M. Texas A&M, I don't think will be a top 10 team because of their ridiculous schedule too.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Jimbo Fisher. I mean, I got to be honest, man. I think that this is my biggest reason for skepticism coming to the season is the schedule.
Yeah.
And that really sucks for Gus coming on the hot seat and having to face this brutality. But
Yep.
I would say we have the number 2 hardest schedule in the country behind South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, you could try to say that, you know, you're, as most SEC teams do, which I think gives SEC teams a little bit of unnecessary flack for, like, you know, oh, they don't play difficult non-conference opponents. That's because that's the only relief you got most of the time, you know,
Right.
is to play not great. So even then, it's not like they're going, yes, you got Samford down there as, you know, a non-Division One or non-FBS team or whatever it is. But, like, you know, Kent State wasn't great last year, but actually Kent State hasn't been great in a few years now that I'm looking at it. A whole lot of Kent State itself has not been good since 2012. But, you know, MAC teams are the type of teams that they get the right personnel and suddenly everything clicks, you know, all at once. That's the type of teams so you never know. Tulane, I
ain't worried about Kent State or Tulane.
Yeah, Kent State, Tulane, I don't know. They're not the easiest non-conference, you know, that you can get is what I'm saying.
Right. It's not like we're playing the Citadel.
Right, you know, that sort of thing.
Alabama.
So anyway, do you feel bold enough to try to make a prediction on wins, losses? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot.
No, let's do this. Let's do this.
All right.
Let's do this.
I want to hear it.
You have a good point, though. Like, as much as I hate Alabama, like, make fun of them, they're typically the ones that schedule the easiest out-of-conference games and neutral fields. Yeah. But in the SEC, doesn't matter. I mean, our schedule is rough enough. We could have scheduled all Sanfords, and it still would have been a tough schedule. Okay, so let's go down the list.
All right.
Game 1, Oregon. Win in the trenches. Win. Great game, but we win. Obviously, Tulane, that's a win. Kent State, win. I think Auburn goes in 3-0 to Texas. College Station, Texas. Texas A&M. And I believe that it's a slugfest. I believe that Auburn pulls that one out.
Okay. 4-0 before the SEC home opener.
Yep. SEC home opener versus Mississippi State. I believe that if it was in Starkville, we would lose that game. But I believe Auburn pulls that one out.
Okay. So you're going 5-0 heading into that nasty road trip.
5-0. Our expectations are low. The first half of the season isn't too crazy. But our expectations are low. We perform well with expectations low. I know you're a big State fan, but I do believe Auburn pulls that out at home. Huge crowd, lots of excitement because we're 4-0 going into that game. But I believe our first loss does come at Florida. So
Okay.
that puts us at 5-1. At Arkansas, that's a win.
All right. 6 wins now.
Yep. At LSU, man, haven't won there in 20 years. So who am I to say that we're going to beat LSU at LSU, not even knowing who our quarterback is yet
Right.
preseason. But, man, it's got to happen at some point. I think a lot of those losses that we had were – a couple of them were some serious blowouts, but a couple of them really should have bounced our way.
Yeah.
I am going to say that I'm going to say that we beat LSU at LSU for the first time.
Wow. So 7 wins now.
7-1. Beat Ole Miss 8-1. I think we're going to lose to Georgia and Alabama.
Okay. So that's a 9-win season that you're looking at. Right? I did the math right.
9-3.
Yeah.
Correct. 9-3.
9-3 is your prediction there for the Auburn Tigers this year.
Mm-hmm.
All right. There we go. 9-3.
That goes with the theme of the pressure. I think we go into this with not a lot of pressure. As we do really well, that adds the pressure. That adds the pressure to the Auburn Tigers, and they haven't done super hot. I mean, look at 2 seasons ago. We beat the number 1 team. In 3 week span, we beat the number 2 team twice. We weren't expected to do it at all. As soon as we did that, turn around, 2 losses straight. So, yeah, we're going to go with it. 9-3. Put it on the board.
Put it on the board. 9-3. All right. I like your like I said, this is one of the reasons why I like to bring in someone who follows the team closely, but then also in particular bring in you because you're not afraid of some hot takes.
Yeah, that's way above the average call. Most people are calling for 8-5 seasons again, but I'm going to stick with low expectations coming in, but high talent. All right.
All
it's
right.
not too crazy. 9-3. It's not too crazy.
I like it. Yeah, I love it. I'm going to disagree with you, I think, on most of it, but I like your boldness right there. Love it, love it, love it. All right, as we wrap up.
What's your projection?
My projection,
right?
Well, try to save the actual predictions for our, the final preview episode that ROTC puts out right before the season officially starts. But just looking at this schedule in particular, I am where did I put the schedule? There it is. I think that I'm thinking max out at 7 wins.
7 wins?
Yeah.
Ooh. Say bye, Gus. That's a fire.
You think that's a fireable?
Gus is gone. Yeah. 7-6. Gus is gone. 8-5 with this tough schedule. There's an argument to keep him.
Yep.
Because of the schedule. But 7-6. Bye, Gus.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot of that comes into youth inexperience at quarterback, and maybe a little bit of uncertainty about whether the running game will be improved enough to help out a young quarterback. But I think that in particular is going to hurt the offense on those away games in particular.
Yeah. Another thing to add to the little bit of negativity coming to the season, that you're not going to read this in the magazines, but Stephen Leaf, Auburn president, just boom, ran out. He's gone.
Yeah.
And I believe he's the reason that Gus is still here. A lot of people wanted him out. A lot of the boosters. Stephen Leaf was a big supporter behind Gus. And our athletic coordinator. So that's the higher ups. There's a little uncertainty going to not just the quarterbacks, but the higher ups into this season. And so Gus doesn't have as big a supporter either. So 7-6, he's gone.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking is about where they land there. So, All right, as we wrap this up on the podcast, Jim, thank you for joining. Why don't you go ahead and tell everyone who is listening to the podcast where they can find you if they want to tune into your streams later on.
Yes, you can find me at www.twitch.com/JimNM, JIMNM. Don't confuse me with Eminem though. I'm mostly Fortnite stream. We talk a lot about sports like we're doing right now. We're live streaming at the moment. Sports, Fortnite. We have a really great time. Play with followers. We'd love to have you guys out here. Family friendly too. And so if you got kids, I know most of you guys listening probably don't even play, but send your kids my way.
Love it. Love it.
War Eagles.
Thank you, Jim. As always, I'm your friend Joseph Craven. This has been Running Out the Clock Sports. We got more team previews coming in. We're just scratching the surface. We got basically the entire top half of the conference to continue talking about as we lead up in the weeks coming up to college football season, which is going to be here lot sooner than you think.
Mm.
It's kind of scary, actually, to think about. So,
Best time of the year is coming soon.
love it. All right. Thanks for listening to ROTC. We'll see you next time.